Hey everyone, welcome to the podcast Too Much Disinformation, the pod that uncovers the good, the bad, and the fake of the online world. I'm your host, Rafi Mendelsohn, and on today's pod, we're going to be covering slithering schemes. It's a new name that actually we've just come up for covering a new trend that we're seeing, a kind of social media bait and switch phenomenon. And we have, talking through this new trend, is Joe Gray. Joe is, few people more qualified to talk about this topic than Joe, actually. He's a veteran of the US Navy Submarine Force and is the founder at the OSINTion, which provides online and in-person training about OSINT and social engineering. By day, Joe is a security threat hunting and intelligence engineer at Mercari, and he's also an esteemed author with titles including The Essentials of Cybersecurity and his most recent book called Practical Social Engineering. He's a great person to follow on LinkedIn, where he writes about all of the ints, GeoMint, iMint, SOCMint, etc., etc. So let's dive straight into it and start the show. Hey Joe, how you doing?
I'm great. How are you? Thanks for having me.
Great, I'm great. Thank you so much for joining us. We were speaking just before I started pressing record, and this is going to be a really interesting topic because actually you're really on the front lines, and so you're able to talk through exactly what you're seeing, which is a kind of brand new phenomenon. Before we get into it though, I have to ask you, same question as I ask everyone else, what was your first ever social media platform?
Depending on which school of thought you subscribe to, it would either be AOL, ICQ, or MySpace.
ICQ, I haven't heard about that one.
It was kind of an alternative to AOL Instant Messenger. They had the chat rooms as well. Very similar to MS Chat, I think was what it was called as well. So in the dial-up days, when you would get your AOL free trial, and then when, your parents didn't want to pay for it, you'd just get another one and then another one and another one. And you had like 12 usernames. And then with ICQ, you could maintain the same username without getting a new AOL account and having to get all your friends back again afterwards.
Awesome. So we're going to introduce a new concept. We've never done this on the pod before, but we're going to introduce a new concept. And I have to give you proper credit because this was Joe. I'm going on the record. It was Joe that coined the term slithering schemes, as he's going to explain why. But it's a new, right? Talk us through it.
Absolutely. So to provide a little bit of backstory, I am afraid of snakes. I am from a part of the country that subscribes to the mentality that the only good snake is a dead snake. Hey, I mean, there's just something a little bit creepy about them. That being said, though, as a kid, one of my favorite wrestlers was actually Jake the Snake Roberts. I remember when he did the program with, at the time, the Macho King Randy Savage, and he actually brought a cobra into the ring and it bit Randy Savage. It was supposed to, but I actually remember that. I remember being so afraid for so long. So fast forward, obviously that storyline probably took place in the early 90s. So let's fast forward about 30 years and few things have changed. I'm still afraid of snakes. And as a byproduct, to try to overcome it, what I've done is I've joined several online forums about snake education that includes just understanding about snakes, understanding venomous snakes, understanding what to do if bitten by a venomous snake. Anyway, as a byproduct of being in all these community things, not even for the purpose of intelligence gathering, I see a lot of scams. And one that I've been seeing, the slithering schemes per se, that one is gaining a lot of prevalence. And what happens is someone, and it's typically a fake account of some sort, if you look at it, typically it's not tied to a person. It'll be like an influencer or a restaurant account with a person's name. They will share a picture. What I've seen quite frequently is either a snake in a toilet or a snake in a bucket or a snake in a flower pot. And it's like, oh my gosh, I found this in insert city here. One thing I have noticed is when they do this, the city is almost always hashtagged. And where I live in the country, we're not the Twitter using type. so to speak. I use it, but the people outside of industry really don't. The only hash that, well, I'm not going to say the only legal hash that we talk about around here is hash browns and corned beef hash. So anyway, using hashtags on social media is just out of the ordinary anyway. But what happens is the post gets shared, it goes viral. There's typically a specific age group and segment that tends to share it without any investigation into it whatsoever. But what happens is
Is
it
that
gets shared.
older?
Yes.
Right.
It is older, and typically I see more women than men sharing it.
Mm-hmm.
So kind of like the retired grandmothers that they just want people to be aware because, the number of times I've seen people say, if I saw this in my flower pot, I'd have a heart attack. So going back to what I'm seeing on social media, it's a diamondback rattlesnake that is not indigenous to this area whatsoever. And basically these accounts, they're pulling the picture from some place. More than likely they're scripted, controlled. They're bots. They're being controlled by an API somewhere or somewhere offshore that has a very low cost of living to where you can pay someone very small amounts to do very unskilled labor. But basically they're getting shared, and then it'll sit and percolate for the longest I've seen is about 12 hours. And then it's replaced with an ad for a house for rent. And the houses for rent, you guessed it, are stock images, or they are taken from Zillow, Redfin, Realtor.com, various places. And usually it's like a 2-bedroom, 1-bath place. It's usually a really small place around 1,100 to 1,500 square feet, as opposed to, a McMansion of sorts. But basically that's what they're doing. And it's not just those posts. It's not just the snake posts doing it. That's the ones that I see most prevalently. I also see a lot of missing senior citizens, missing children, and dogs that they found on the side of the road that had been hit by a car in these posts as well. But the same thing happens. I mean, the snake one is probably the only one that doesn't really tug at people's heartstrings. That's more of a shock value. If we look at the psychological reason why people share it, it's more of I would break my neck in getting away from that. But the others, it's tugging at your heartstrings. And, when we see a missing senior citizen, we see a missing child, we see a dog that has been harmed, we want to help. But then ultimately it gets shared. And someone asked, why are people doing this? And it took me a second, and then I realized, what kind of information do you have to input to rent a house?
So this is an attempt to secure your private information.
At a minimum. And then more often than not, are you not charged an application fee?
Got it. So this is a great way of getting quite valuable information about individuals.
And the domain always redirects typically to a Google site that's got a Google form embedded in it. So, if for people that may have a good connection to Google, it's not too hard to get that part taken down. It's just getting the social media part of it taken down is the hard part because, I'm seeing this quite frequently on Facebook. And in some cases, reporting some things on Facebook, it gets responded to immediately. It gets dealt with swiftly, and no problems with that. For some things, the things that require a little bit more analysis that they've not trained their AI on yet, it just completely flies under the radar, and this is one of those cases.
So let's just break it down, the recipe, of this phenomenon, for this new trend. Someone's posting an image that is either emotive or shocking or elicits a response, an emotional response. You have a bunch of people responding, and within hours after it's gained lots of engagement, likes, shares, etc., then the image is replaced for something that brings people to share their information via a link, via a form. But in doing so, it's kind of jacked up the algorithm. So more people are seeing this image and more people are engaging this image than ordinarily if you just posted a fake image. But crucially, you're saying that the image is fake, but it takes you to a form where it can collect information about you. Is that right?
That is absolutely correct.
Wow. Wow. Okay.
The houses that they are posting for rent, in all honesty, have been previously posted for rent. They have legitimately been rented out, but
Mm-hmm.
more often than not, they are not in the same geographic region that they are posting in. I saw one that had palm trees, and I was like, when did palm trees start growing here?
Right. I see.
I'm too
Interesting.
far inland, and it gets too cold here for palm trees to succeed.
And are you seeing this across a specific social media platform or all of them?
Primarily Facebook. It's
Primarily.
primarily targeting the older audience. To some degree, I think that it's targeting women a little bit more than men because women tend to be more empathetic than men. They tend to be a little bit more mindful of suffering, in such as the case of children and animals and elderly folks. But then also, women do a lot of gardening. I'm not saying men don't garden. I do a little bit of gardening myself, but that's who would typically see it. And in groups like yard sale groups or garage sale groups or recipe sharing groups, things like that, who's your primary audience? Women. So when they share it, it tends to go somewhat viral. But I mean, with my veterans groups that are predominantly men, I've seen my fair share of disinformation there as well. But it's typically a little bit more politically motivated, a little bit more sinister, and you've got to dig in a lot deeper. It's not just a simple bait and switch like this is.
Wow. So you're saying actually it takes place mostly within groups themselves, and the original image will be connected to the interest of that group.
Not the only interest to the group would be the geographic location usually. And what they will do
Mm-hmm.
is they'll post it to their own page and they will have the access control set to public. And then they'll just share it into the group so that even if you're in a private or a secret group that doesn't allow sharing externally, it can be shared.
Fascinating. Fascinating. Wow.
And
And I suppose due to the nature of it, it's probably quite hard to catch, right? It's something you're uncovering. Who knows how long it's been going on for? But actually, you're not talking about anything that's. I mean, it's fake images, but it's nothing that's been kind of created. It's been actually lifted out of other sources that has actually happened. There was once a house that was for rent that was listed on a legitimate listing site. I'd imagine that's very, very difficult to be able to shut down and stop.
absolutely. And looking at this from a threat intelligence perspective, because, in addition to the OSINT, in addition to the social media, I do threat intelligence. So it's all about being able to build a detection, in the cyber world, we're always talking about indicators of compromise and the TTPs. And indicators of compromise can be changed fairly easily. It's not hard to get a new IP address or get a new domain. The TTPs are the hard part to change because as people, we are creatures of habit. If we find something that works, we use it until it doesn't work anymore. So, from this perspective, I think it would be hard to build detections because it would rely on you leveraging. If I worked at Facebook right now and I was tasked with making a detection for this, I would have to work with the AI team to work on a classifier that would classify the image as a house and then or a snake, and then I would have to get a little bit further about the snake in terms of it would need to be a snake coiled up in something round. And then with that, there would also need to be the context of looking for a minimum of one hashtag and then certain charged language with that. And
Wow.
that's the part that would make it so hard because with the volume of stuff that these social media platforms are dealing with, honestly, I'm not the biggest fan of social media. It's a blessing and a curse. It just depends on which role I'm inhabiting when I'm asked that question. But
Hmm.
with the volume of stuff they are dealing with, I mean, this was happening far before 2016, but that's when it really broke open. that countries were staffing teams to propagate disinformation on social media for the purpose of influencing elections, public sentiment, and everything. I mean, we could
Mm-hmm.
talk about that for hours. It's put a huge burden on the social media platforms' ability to manually moderate. And then, of course, COVID, that threw a wrench in the engine, which it honestly, it really shouldn't have for a social media platform, because if I can access Facebook from the middle of nowhere, then there's no reason that Facebook employees should have to be in the office. They should be able to access Facebook from the middle of nowhere as well. So that's a little bit self-inflicted, but at the same time, there's only so many hours in a day, and there's only so many people that can be hired to do the work, that's willing to do the work, that's financially lucrative for a business. So they're having to augment it using algorithms such as AI, machine learning, and etc. And will they eventually build a detection for it? Maybe, I hope. But that's why it's so prolific, because it's, I mean, going from start to finish, starting with a picture of a senior citizen, an injured animal, a missing child, a house for rent, or a snake, those are all pretty benign images.
Mm.
Considering the other stuff that will make your skin crawl that they have to deal with, I
Mm-hmm.
understand. But it's also a pretty big threat. And the thing is, there's two sides that go with. I have two trains of thought associated with the target audience of these scams. One, the majority of the people that are falling victim to these scams would never put in their personal information, because they either inherited their parents' house and they stay there, or they're at that point in life where they've already paid off their mortgage and they have no desire to rent a house.
Mm.
But sometimes they may have an elderly family member, or a sibling or children that could potentially fall victim to this, and that's really where it's coming from. And ultimately, that's probably going to lead to some long-term identity theft. Honestly, very similar to when the Surfside apartments collapsed in Miami, and a lot of people were missing, and I some of the people haven't even been recovered yet. But there was a story that came out a while after that, that they were already observing where people who perished or were missing had their identity stolen, because very similar to the Gabby Petito case with true crime, a lot of web sleuths want to help. And what they do is they go off, they collaborate with some people, they share it. It's on a Google Drive, but the thing is, they don't lock it down, and then someone finds the link and they just take all of the data and steal the
Wow.
identity, and that's what it is. In this case, it's a little bit more, it's a lot less passive. So it's requiring some level of interaction. But, if someone posts a link for, say, a house for sale, if they do it organically, it's going to get, depending on the person, probably 10 to 100 likes.
Mm-hmm.
If you can get something like this to go viral and then shift it over, you might not get any likes, but the number of people who are going to, on purpose or just through a slip of the finger, accidentally click the link,
Mm-hmm.
that's going to be tremendously amplified.
Yeah.
The one thing I will say about this, though, is leveraging Google Sheets, that does provide a little bit of assurance that there's no direct malware associated, because that's one thing that Google would definitely pick up on.
I see. I see. So we're not talking about a malware situation. What we're really talking about is identity fraud, right?
Yes.
Mm. Okay. But the types of information that you can gather on someone, especially regarding interest in renting somewhere or buying a property, there's quite a lot of information there. There's enough to
Right.
go on, right?
Well, I mean, think about it. What kind of information are you prompted for before you rent a house? Because any reputable rental entity, whether it be a homeowner or a real estate investment trust or whatever, they're going to want your name, your social, your date of birth. They're going to do a background check of some sort. They're going to do a credit check. And then they're going to want some rental or address history, anywhere between 3 and 7 years. And then from
Mm.
there, more often than not, if you're renting, a lot of places will charge you an application fee. So it is not outside the context using the particular pretext that they are going with. It is perfectly consistent with character for them to ask for money. And if they want to get a little bit more sinister with it, oh, well, I need your routing and account number as opposed to a card number.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Or I need a
Yeah.
check.
Wow.
I've seen some that mention cryptocurrency, but it's like, oh, here, link your crypto wallet. And when I saw that, I was like, I already knew this was a scam, but that pretty much confirms if you have to link a crypto wallet, that's definitely confirming it.
Emerging trend. The question that we always ask and receive is who is likely to be behind this? And it's such a hard question to answer, right? It's impossible, really, to a certain extent, to really truly map it. But what are your thoughts in terms of who is it likely to be? Where in the world are they likely to be, etc.?
In terms of who, I don't think it's a country per se, unlike a lot of the misinformation and disinformation that we see that we can attribute to a particular narrative to a particular country. With this one, I think it's more of like fraud rings, maybe organized crime associated with it for the purpose of just, one of their hustles. But in terms of the part of the world, I don't really know for certain. What I can say is I've noticed that they use the Queen's English with the accounts, and the times of day they post puts them typically towards Eastern Asia. So I would say probably the Indian subcontinent area, but that could also include parts of, say, Malaysia, Indonesia, Singapore. That could include parts of Papua New Guinea as well, just within that time frame. And that's assuming that you actually have people pushing buttons. If you've got code running, your guess is as good as mine.
Fascinating, really fascinating. And also, I presume the profiles themselves, also looking back to earlier in the discussion, we were talking about, how to be able to detect these things. The accounts that are posting it are going to be fake, right? They're not going to be those real people. There will be fake, inauthentic accounts that have been created.
Exactly.
In fact, maybe that's one way of clamping down on it.
And the other thing is they're not user profiles. They are creator or influencer, or I've even seen restaurant profiles that just has a person's name and image. So if you're just looking at it in the app, it just looks like a regular person. But if you go to the profile, you see, oh, well, this person is a car dealership and they have 0 reviews. And that's exactly what it is. So with that puts a layer of obscurity behind it because you can't see who is behind it. And they could have multiple accounts behind it as well that have managed access on said profile. So, it could be all over the world. It reminds me of an account that I saw that was sharing very explicit images. It was a link to a website, but it was very explicit images, in some cases involving humans and animals. It was pretty disgusting stuff. And I just kept reporting. I think the account finally got taken down or kicked out of the group, but that account was based in Vietnam. And the name that they had used was so common that it's like, yeah, good luck. It's like looking for John Smith in the United States.
Yeah. Fascinating, a bit terrifying, both because of the situation, the trend that you've uncovered, but also because the conversation was about snakes as well. But I really want to thank you for taking the opportunity to talk us through. I think that's one of the interesting things about this podcast and the conversations that I get to have is you're never really sure exactly what you're going to be covering. And I think this is really fascinating and really gave us an opportunity, which we don't always do, to really get into the specifics of something that you're seeing and unpacking something that you're seeing so people should be aware of. I also think it's another great example of, often when people think about this information, they're thinking about the classic obvious ones of, election integrity, or they're thinking about, social engineering in some way. But actually, this is very interesting, and hopefully will make people think about it, but also give an update and an alert to those in the threat intelligence world. What I would like to finish on is to ask you to name one good thing, one bad thing, and one fake thing you're seeing on the online world today. Although I appreciate you've already covered in length that one thing that you're fake, but I would love to hear your thoughts.
Sure. So, for the good thing, I'm actually going to do a shout out to the K-pop stans. And for that, it's every time you see some inflammatory hashtag associated with a trend, specifically on Twitter, associated with some conspiracy or some nonsense, those group of people, they're really doing God's work, just hijacking those hashtags. I'm not a big fan of BTS, but I know that whenever I see one of those hashtags and I click it, I'm like, thank you so much, you K-pop stans.
That's amazing.
On the bad side, I think really we're seeing a continued trend with meddling from other countries. We're seeing a lot of narrative coming from that, as the 2024 election nears, it's only going to get worse. And something I'm starting to kind of pick up on is the same playbook that has been used to get some of those false narratives out on the right is now making its way to the left as well. So, fortunately, as someone who's more, I have my political beliefs, but when I have my investigative hat on, I try to be more nonpartisan. Fortunately, I've already investigated all these things so many times on the other side. It's making it really easy to find it on the current side. But as a result, that's going to lead to some chaos as well. And then, the fake stuff, I mean, I would say probably 98% of the internet, most pictures I see of snakes, that's definitely fake. Someone, I believe it was in a national group, I think someone from Alabama, if I recall correctly, was trying to say that their neighbor had a gaboon viper at their mailbox crossing the street. For those of you not aware, the gaboon viper is native to Africa. It's related to the adders, like a puff adder. It's a very large, heavy snake. It's a very slow snake, but if I recall, they have the largest head of any pit viper. Their venom is being used to work on new medications for cancer treatments, for diabetes, for several other things, a lot of great stuff with it, but they just don't survive in the United States. You can see them frequently at zoos, but that's the one fake thing. Sticking with the topic of snakes, like a gaboon viper is such a beautiful snake to look at, as long as there is a computer monitor or a phone between it and me. Like I even get skeeved out when I see them at the zoos, but they're beautiful to look at. They are huge. They're not very long. They're very stocky, but that's probably the fake.
Okay, thank you. So the main message here is watch out for snakes in the real world, but also watch out for snakes in the online world as well. Joe, thank you so much for talking us through. This has been really fascinating, and I really think people listening will probably agree as well. For people that want to follow your stuff, because I know you put out a lot of really interesting content, where can they follow you?
Sure. So I am on Twitter at C_3PJoe. You can find me on LinkedIn. I'm just Joe Gray. The actual link would be Joe Gray InfoSec at the very end for the LinkedIn link. I do have an eyeball emoji next to my name that's used as a honeypot. From there, the OSINTion, you can find that at theosintion.com. It's spelled the OSINT. We also maintain a Discord server. We maintain a YouTube channel, a podcast, several other things. I will collaborate with Rafi and get the links to get put into the show notes for that as well.
Great, and we'll put them all in the show notes. And also, don't forget, there are a few books, including Practical Social Engineering, that Joe has written that's available on Amazon that he's about to show us up on screen, and that's what it looks like. Thank you so much, Joe. I appreciate it. It's a good thing to end on. And have a great rest of the day, Joe, and everyone listening. Take care.
Thank you.